It really is layered like an onion, like a really sweet onion. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw pretty darn bad. It's not every day we get to read a refreshing novel from the 20th century, but today is that day. We are going to be traveling to beautiful Italy as we look into the picturesque eyes of a young girl on her first real trip away from home in E.M. Forster's A Room with a View. Just so you know, I'm doing a reading challenge where I'm reading the top 100 novels of the 20th century as decided by the Modern Library. You can find more information in the description below. First, a TLDR on this book. I was about to say movie. It is a movie, but on this book. A Room with a View was published in 1908, which is shortly before the First World War. So this means that we are looking at pre-World War I Italy through the eyes of our youngest narrator, or rather our youngest heroine, Lucy Honeychurch. Now, this is Forster's third novel, and you can tell that he's definitely had a lot to think about in terms of the kind of book he wants to write, because just as our main characters go to Italy, he is also fresh off a voyage where he spent a lot of time with British tourists. And you'll get to know how he feels about British tourists because this book is all about British tourism. And within this book, you will find a wide variety of people who seem very lifelike, but also a caricature of the kind of people you meet while you travel. Now, in terms of characters, there are two main characters in my mind in this book. The first is Miss Lucy Honeychurch, which the name is both hilarious and sexual at the same time. And she is the main character who's out looking for love. And she is on a trip before she's ready to go settle down with Cecil, a well-to-do middle-class young man who is from a very respectable family. And this eligible young bachelorette is traveling with her direct opposite, which is the spinster Charlotte Bartlett, who is someone we're going to see as a very funny character, but also kind of a villain in this book. Now, again, talking about the setting, because this was set in the early 20th century, this was during the period of Britain when it was Edwardian society. So there was the Victorian era, which was very big on sort of a very constricted social atmosphere, having lots of rules for how society worked. However, in Edwardian society, there's a loosening of social pressures on young men and women, and this is sort of the environment that we find Lucy Honeychurch in. This novel captures perfectly the idyllic spirit of adventure for a young woman on her first real travel away from home, while being accompanied by her perhaps clinically depressed cousin, Miss Bartlett, who is well-meaning but also is the staunch definition of desires no adventure. Miss Charlotte Bartlett is there to make sure Lucy gets a little bit of foreign culture so she comes back as dignified and perhaps sort of like a noble class woman, but not enough culture that she becomes like a hippie or decides she wants to go to Burning Man. And this kind of chaperoning is important because in Edwardian society, romance and feelings of deep romance or passion are not valued when it comes to marriage proposals or marriage material. And there's obviously like a lot of interesting and strange religious ideals put upon that about how the women need to be like, fresh and a virgin and stuff. It really matters in this book that, women need to not be deflowered or defaced by evil, horrible men. Just remember in this book, Lucy doesn't have a lot of control in what she's doing. She is always under the watchful eye of an adult who is willing to take her out of circumstances if it seems like those circumstances are against the values of sort of Edwardian English society. Now, the plot itself is actually fairly simple. It's quite a funny thing because Lucy thinks the way her life is going to go is she's going to go on a quick little tour of Italy that will be fun, but nothing more, and then come home and marry Cecil and live in the middle of nowhere, England, where nothing really happens. Now, as part of her journey into Italy, Lucy is obsessed with her guidebook, the Baedeker, or Baedeker. I don't really know how you say it. There's like 5 different ways to say it, depending on which country you're from. And the Baedeker is like a Bible for tourists at the time. It was considered one of the top, if not the best guidebook of things you should see of important historical monuments or documents. It was like a Lonely Planet guide, and one that the author hilariously makes fun of many times throughout the book, because this guide is considered Lucy's Bible. She literally thinks this book is the only thing she needs to experience the real Italy. And to be fair, no one had Google Maps or TripAdvisor back then. They just got on a boat and left somewhere for 6 to 8 weeks. And so this very, I would say, stereotypical pair of a young woman looking for adventure and an older woman looking to guard this girl against adventure and passion set out for Italy, which in its way is kind of like the symbol for the land of passion. However, as Lucy and Charlotte arrive, they encounter the most frustrating problem, which is the start and the premise of the start of the book, which is they have a room that faces the inner courtyard and it does not face outside towards Italy. And they're there in their first week of Italy and there's nothing to see because they don't have a room with a view. Let me read you a quote from the start of the book. "The Signora had no business to do it," said Miss Bartlett. "No business at all. She promised us south rooms with a view close together, instead of which here are north rooms looking into a courtyard, and a long way apart. Oh, Lucy." "And a Cockney besides," said Lucy, who had been further saddened by the Signora's unexpected accent. "It might be London." She looked at the 2 rows of English people who were sitting at the table, at the row of white bottles of water and red bottles of wine that ran between the English people, at the portraits of the late Queen and the late Poet Laureate that hung behind the English people, heavily framed, at the notice of the English Church, Reverend Cuthbert Eager, M.A. Oxon, that was their only other decoration of the wall. "Charlotte, don't you feel too that we might be in London? I can hardly believe that all kinds of other things are just outside. I suppose it's one being so tired." "This meat has surely been used for soup," said Miss Bartlett, laying down her fork. "I want so to see the Arno. The rooms the Signora promised us in her letter would have looked over the Arno. The Signora had no business to do it at all. Oh, it is a shame." Any nook does it for me," Miss Bartlett continued. "But does it seem hard that you shouldn't have a view?" You can see from this passage that Italian tourism knew exactly how to give British tourists what they want, which is a view of Britain, but like a small, tiny taste of Italy, but not too much. It's very much like going to modern day Europe or Asia, and then going directly into McDonald's to eat as soon as you arrive. And it's sort of like what Lucy says, if we were just going to come here to stay in a house that looks exactly like Britain, why did we come at all? Now, as they discuss this view that they don't have quite loudly in the restaurant where all the other patrons are eating, because it was sort of like a guest house where, you ate your meals inside with the other residents. The table next to them were seated 2 other British tourists who couldn't help overhear their plight, and it was 2 men. And these 2 men are the Emersons. Mr. Emerson, the father of George Emerson, who will eventually become the romantic interest of Lucy later in the book. Now, George's father, who's a very nice man, but maybe a little too forward for most British people, said they don't mind switching rooms with them because actually they have a beautiful view of outside. And Lucy and Charlotte were shocked by this behavior because actually this would be considered sort of not acceptable. And they also didn't want to have to feel like that a social obligation to the Emersons in case later the Emersons said, "We gave you something, now you owe us something in return." Now, they were about to leave this particular hotel or pension house or whatever you want to call it when they were stopped by yet another British tourist, yet this time someone they knew, which is the local pastor from their area, Mr. Beebe. It's kind of like, going to Greece and then seeing your high school teacher there. Very strange. Now, they have a very nice dinner with Mr. Beebe and explain the whole social situation and how they don't have a room with a view because that's all they can talk about at this point. And when Mr. Beebe finds out that the Emersons were willing to switch with them, Mr. Beebe goes and makes the arrangements so that it's all quid pro quo, because if a friendly neighborhood parish priest offers you strange men's rooms, completely socially acceptable. Now, finally, we've entered the rooms with a view. And they are beautiful rooms because they overlook the picturesque river, the Arno. And this is one of the most beautiful and important rivers in Italy. And from here, really from here, Lucy's adventure with Europe begins. Now, as Lucy follows her guidebook and starts exploring the various towns where they are or goes on bus tours, and does all the things that a typical tourist would do, she starts to fall in love with Italy. And her whole perspective on life changes. At first, she was concerned with mixing up the Machiavelli statues with the statues of patron saints, which the juxtaposition is hilarious. And then concerned with losing her guidebook, which she eventually does, of course. As any tourist, you lose various items. But by losing her guidebook, she starts to have real adventures in a foreign land. And you begin to discover interesting things about that world you didn't expect, or about that land that you didn't expect, while at the same time discovering things about yourself. Take this quote from Lucy as she is very tired after a long day of touring, as the experiences of art and the architecture and just her travels start to all blend together, and how she feels in that moment. Nothing ever happens to me, Lucy reflected, as she entered the Piazza Signoria and looked nonchalantly at its marvels, now fairly familiar to her. The great square was in shadow. The sunshine had come too late to strike it. Neptune was already unsubstantial in the twilight, half god, half ghost, and his fountain splashed dreamily to the men and satyrs who had idled together on its merge. It was the hour of unreality, the hour that is when the unfamiliar things are real. I love this moment because shortly following this moment of her in a place she thinks now is familiar, she immediately witnesses a man being knifed to death in the street, which is quite a turn of events. As she sees this man getting stabbed, she faints within the plaza, and George saves her. And what we can take from this passage is, when you say nothing ever happens to you, be careful what you wish for, folks. And here we begin to see, sort of around this turn in the book, where Lucy's life takes a turn, and the book takes a turn, and we get to see the point of the book. And this idea of having feelings and thoughts of your own that aren't dictated by social pressures or by family values are something Lucy begins to experience as she's coming into adulthood. And she's trying to figure out, what exactly do I personally value versus what are the values others are trying to place in front of me? And isn't that sort of like having a room of your own, a place that is not dictated by the social pressures that other people put on you? And as time goes on and George and Lucy meet each other more frequently and perhaps share a forbidden kiss, at this point Charlotte decides that the adventure needs to be over, because Lucy might end up falling in love with George, someone who might not be socially acceptable for her to marry. And with that, she ferries Lucy back all the way to England, thinking that nothing will ever come of this ever again. But of course, in the end, George ends up showing up in Lucy's hometown, and then Lucy must, of course, choose between George, who's improper match, but someone who she's falling in love with, and Cecil, who is the proper social match, but is someone she could never be in love with. And so then, the book puts it quite clearly that Lucy is faced with three choices, not just two. She could marry George and perhaps be romantically happy. She could marry Cecil and uphold her station in society. Or she could live like her cousin, Miss Charlotte Bartlett, and she could be a spinster for the rest of her life, which she honestly considers during this book. Because honestly, sometimes men aren't the answer, people. Sometimes the answer is say no. Thankfully, for the reader, I'm not spoiling it because this book is very clear where it's going. In this book, she chooses George and to go have her happiness. And even though this book has a very happy ending, there are very real social stresses that exist in this book. George and Lucy decide to leave England altogether and head to mainland Europe and live abroad so that they can live a life of art and love and passion like they want to, away from the social pressures of their families. Thematically, you could say that this book is about travel, art, and the beautiful moments in everyday life. And while that sounds like really shallow and trite when I say it, I really do think the author does a great job of showing what seem to be very simple, normal moments as moments that are incredibly beautiful and impactful to the characters in the book. And it's also about how some giant pieces of art to Lucy that she was supposed to feel certain things according to her guidebook, she didn't feel them at all, but instead it was stumbling into an alley or into a forest or into a field of flowers and seeing a sunset that you didn't expect. And that's the moment where the art of the moment of where you are really mattered to Lucy and matters to us as readers. You could also say this book is about love, self-discovery, and also self-determination, which was a somewhat foreign concept in Edwardian society. compared to maybe today. The biggest choice that Lucy is going to make in this book isn't about who she's going to marry, but more what kind of woman is she going to be. The constant presence of her very annoying but seemingly well-meaning cousin means Lucy can't immediately make the choice that seems so obvious to her and readers. Yet under sort of the veneer of this well-meaning chaperone of her cousin is the darker side of her cousin, who we find out doesn't wish Lucy very well at all. Lucy can't trust Charlotte as her cousin or as her chaperone. And, all the choices that Lucy makes have definite social consequences for her. So this book, even though it seems like a fun, happy travel adventure novel, there are real consequences to what Lucy does, and that's sort of the darker or perhaps more complex meaning layered within the book. Now, on to the review. This book is formulaic. And it is so formulaic that you have probably read a million romance novels just like it. It really gives off Eat, Pray, Love vibes in the worst way possible. I mean, do we need to ever ask where the plot is going? We never need to ask where the plot is going. Never. But under sort of the veneer of comedy and sort of the double entendres of the silly names of people in this book, there are, I think, deeper themes that the author is trying to get forward after he traveled to Europe and had some experiences of his own. Because I think he looked back and saw his own society of British people as very stuck in the mud and not very forward-thinking or creative in comparison to somewhere like Italy. I will say that some of the caricatures of the characters in this book felt quite flat, and they felt kind of more like cardboard cutouts than real people, but hilariously, the descriptions of art and the descriptions of the scenery are what really stood out in full 3D for me during this book. So there's a real dedication to beauty in this book, but at the same time, some of the passages of this book, and just this book in general, can feel very forgettable because of its veneer as a romantic comedy. I think if you like any kind of romance novel, you will absolutely like this book. And I think if you like books with happy endings, you will like this book. It has a happy ending. And more importantly, this book is short and fast-paced, which already makes it a winner in my book. Okay, well that's all for me this time. I think this is a great book that you could pick up very easily and read on the beach if you so desire. But what did you think of this book? Do you think that this book is a fun, fast read, or do you think that this book is better left behind? Now, if you like this review, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, I love reading comments from people who have read this book or want to read this book, so feel free to leave me a comment in the comment section below. Next time, we will be going from romance to spies and adventure in Rudyard Kipling's Kim. I hope you'll join me at that time. I hope you're getting a wonderful week of reading done, and as always, stay curious, stay reading.